Hi everyone. So we're going to have a look now at the Dyatlov Pass Incident. If you're not aware of this, if you've never heard of it before, in February of 1959, 9 experienced young hikers went missing in the Ural Mountains in northern Russia, and they were then all found dead. And to this day, there isn't a reasonable explanation as to what happened to them, although there are over 72 theories over what could have happened. So I'm going to talk you through what we know as fact, and then have a look at one or two of the theories available. So sometime during the late evening of February 1st into the early hours of February 2nd, for some inexplicable reason, they cut open the side of their tent, went out into the snow in below freezing temperatures, and walked to a different site where they slowly died. Now, I will run through who we're talking about here to start with. So we have Igor Dyatlov, who was 23 at this point. He was the leader of the group. Yuri Doroshenko, who was 21 years old and died 2 days after his 21st birthday. Lyudmila Dubinina, who was 20 years old. Yuri Krivonishenko, also known as Georgi, was 23 years old, and he died 6 days before his birthday. Alexander Kolevatov, who was 24. Zenaida Kolmogorova, who was 22 years old. Rustem Slobodin, who was 23 years old. Nikolai Thiabo-Briganol, who was 23 years old. Semyon Zolotaryov, who was 38 years old, and Yuri Yudin, who was 21 years old. Now, these were all experienced grade 2 hikers, so they were doing this to get their grade 3, which at the time in Soviet Russia was the highest grade you could get for skiing and mountain climbing. So they were all extremely experienced, and several of them had actually been to the Ural Mountains on a previous occasion. So they knew the area and they knew what they were doing. So which makes this even more surprising. The only member of the group who wasn't a student at the Polytechnic Institute is actually Semyon Zolotaryov, who was 38 years old. Now, he was actually a professional ski instructor and had spent 5 winters with the Soviet Army during World War II. So he was he knew survival skills. He actually joined the expedition a few days before they were due to go, because the expedition he had planned to be on didn't happen. Now, they were going to Mount Ortorten, which is one of the mountains in the Urals. They left on the morning on January 23rd. So what we'll do is we'll have a quick look at their itinerary a second, and we'll go from there to have a look down it all. So they planned, as you can see here, it was meant to have been a 21-day trip, starting off at Sverdlovsk, going then via train and truck to Vizhay, which is sort of the final proper town before you start going up, and then making their way to Mount Ortorten, and then back round to Vizhay, and finally back on to Sverdlovsk, where they'd go back to their university. So that was the plan. Now, the first interesting thing is the bodies weren't found near Mount Ortorten. They were actually camped on the Kholat Syakhl, which is not a mountain they'd intended to go near. So that's the first interesting point. Now, there is a local tribe in the area called the Mansi, And they, for them, Kholat Syakhl is Dead Mountain or Mountain of the Dead. Now, there's quite a few different ideas around that. I had a look to try and see which one's the most accurate, but different places give different explanations. So the most common explanation is nothing grows on the mountain and there are no animals there. So they call it Dead Mountain because it's just a dead wasteland. The other explanation, and this one I think may be fictionalized to fit in with the narrative, but according to Mansi legend, apparently, 9 Mansi hunters died on the Kholat Syakhl, and they consider it to be a place of evil spirits, which is why it's called Mountain of the Dead. Now, what we're going to do now is have a look through the diaries. So every member of the group kept a personal diary, but they also kept a group diary, which is what they'd have to turn in to be able to get their grade 3. So this is what allows us to know what actually happened, at least so far. So at 9 p.m. on January the 23rd, they took a train from Sverdlovsk to Sarov. It was pretty uneventful. They were singing on the train. They had a mandolin, so they were playing music, and there was discussions about love and hiking and things like that. So it was just a general friends having fun, getting excited time at this point. They arrived in Sarov at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they weren't allowed into the club area. So basically, if you go to a train station, you know, the waiting room where you can sort of get in out of the cold or out of the rain, and sometimes there'll be someone to get coffee or something to eat. Well, they weren't allowed in there. They were prevented from going in. So they stood around on the train station, and Yuri Krivonoshenko got out the mandolin and started to sing to try and pass the time. And he actually got arrested for it. They said that it was for a breach of the peace and that no singing was allowed on the train station. So they let him go eventually, and they went along to a local school where they spent the day talking to the kids about hiking, and it's called sports tourism at the time, so it's something that young people could do during their time off that was approved by the Soviet government. So they spent all day basically in there chatting away with the kids, and the kids loved it. When they left to go and get their train at 6:30 p.m, the kids actually ran after them crying, begging them to stay. So they made quite an impact there. On the train to Ivdel, they actually got accused of stealing someone's vodka. Now the police got involved and the guy was a drunk, so they pretty much ignored his claims. Now what's interesting is previous to this, both Zinaida and Yuri had commented that they had no alcohol on them just in case there was a medical emergency. So that's quite interesting. Now they arrived at Ivdel at midnight, where they just waited essentially to get a bus. So they got a bus at 5:30 a.m. on January the 25th to Vizhay. They arrived in Vizhay at around 2 p.m. and they stayed the night there. So they did watch a movie as well, which they all commented on in the diary, called Symphony in Gold. They all had varying views, but generally the view was that it was a really good movie and they had a good time. Now, in the guest house where they were staying, there weren't enough beds for everyone. So Zinaida and Ludmila actually shared a bed, and Yuri Krivonoshenko and Klevetov, who in the diaries is referred to as Sasha, which as far as I can tell was his nickname, ended up sleeping on the floor. So they were both quite cranky in the morning, and I can't say I blame them. I don't think I'd be too happy sleeping on the floor all night when you've got a big hike coming up. On January 26th, they woke up at 9 a.m. and in their group diary, they've recorded the temperature as being minus 17 degrees Celsius. So it's already really cold. They had a breakfast of goulash and tea and complained that the tea was cold. In the diary, it actually records Igor Dyatlov saying maybe we should drink the tea outside because the tea will feel warmer if we're outside. So they went on from there to settlement 41, which is sort of a small logging area. They went there by truck, which took 3 hours and 20 minutes. Now that is recorded exactly in the group diary. They were greeted very warmly at the settlement and were given a room at the hostel where they watched a few movies again, and they were even able to buy some bread. So while they were there, it was arranged that a horse-drawn cart would assist them in getting to the second northern settlement, which is an old abandoned mining town. They were told about a particular house in the town that was still able to be used as well, so it still had a roof and it was standing. So they left then on January the 27th to go on to the second northern. They were on skis and their backpacks and equipment were all on this horse-drawn cart. Yuri Yudin at this point begins to complain about his sciatica flaring up and that he's hoping he starts to get better. They set themselves up in the hut for the night, and a few of them actually cut their hands on rusty nails. So January 28th, the temperature's only -8 degrees. Now, over here, I know if somebody told me the temperature was -8 degrees, I'd probably put my pajamas straight back on and jump under the covers and stay in bed all day with the heating on. But considering they're in Russia and they're hiking and they're expecting the weather to get extremely cold, it's not too bad. At this point, Yuri Yudin knows that he can't continue. He's worried that he's going to slow the group down and put the entire expedition in jeopardy if he stays. His sciatica has gotten so bad he knows he won't be able to ski. So he's actually going to go back at this point to Vijay and wait for everyone. And there are some really lovely photos of them saying goodbye to Yuri because he was a very dear friend to them. In the diaries, a few of them actually say that they're really sad he can't go and they're going to miss him. It actually turned out to be really good for Yuri that he couldn't continue. Otherwise, he probably would have met the same fate as the others. So they, at 10:45, they leave and they have to take 10-minute turns going in front because of how deep the snow is. So essentially they walk in a line. The first person will take 10 minutes packing down the snow to make it easier on the rest of the group, and then they'll go to the back of the line and carry on like that. With the exception of Yuri Krivonoshenko, who stays behind a lot to actually take some sketches. They stop then at 5:30 p.m. They set everything up. Now, Igor Dyatlov has actually made the tent himself that they're sleeping in, because they're all in one tent rather than two. So what he's done is he's actually stitched two tents together. And they have a stove of his own creation because he's actually studying engineering at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. So he's made his own stove, and it has a sort of chimney feature so that it can be vented from inside the tent, which is quite good. So they use that for cooking, and they comment that it's actually rather a warm night because the stove heats the tent really nicely. Now, nobody wants to sleep by the stove, so Yuri Krivonoshenko is made to. Now, if you'll remember, he was also made to sleep on the floor at the guest house. So at this point, he's really annoyed, and in her diary, Lyudmila actually states that there was arguing well into the night, and several times he just started making really grumbly comments. And in Zina's diary, she actually puts, Igor was rude the whole evening. Now that could be as a result of the arguments with Yuri Krivonoshenko. She doesn't go into any more detail than that, just that he's rude. I suppose the one thing to put there is if she's the only one who finds him rude, these pair, they used to date and they'd broken up by this point, so there could have always been a bit of tension there as well. On January 29th, it's Yuri Doroshenko's birthday. When they wake up, it's minus 13 degrees and there's just a weak wind. But they do find that Yuri Krivonashenko's coat has some burn marks. Now, they think that's from the stove that possibly some embers floated down in the night, because it's suspended from the tent. So there's not much more is said about it than that, but that's what we gather. They need to stop every 70 minutes, roughly, which is sort of 2 to 3 kilometers to rest, because it's quite hard going at this point. And they spend the night at the river, the Hospices tributary. Now, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing any of these badly, but I don't speak Russian, so my pronunciation is probably horrific. So they pass a pretty uneventful night on January the 29th. January the 30th is Kolevatov's birthday. They actually give him a tangerine in the evening, which he quarters up very quickly and gives everyone a piece. So that's his sort of happy birthday treat. It's minus 17 degrees in the morning when they make a start at 9:30. They follow the Mansi path, which is sort of a deer trail. Now, the trees have markings on it, which the group don't fully understand, but having looked into it, it appears to be Mansi markings of what animals are found in the area, the regularity, things like that. So it's really useful for Mansi trappers and hunters, but not much good for anybody else. So they follow the Mansi path, but they end up having to backtrack 200 meters to find a spot to camp. So that's going to have eaten into their time, because they're on quite a strict time schedule. Now, the reason I mention this is because they changed their course. So this could have had an impact on that. If they've lost time somewhere due to it being slow going or having to backtrack, it could have caused Igor Dyatlov to rethink their route and change it to try and get that time back. So they backtrack and they stop at 5 p.m. to set up camp. Ludmilla is so tired, she just basically flops down. Now, they've got a rule while they're out, which is nobody can sit by the fire until everything is done. So the tent needs to be set up, any holes need to be patched, everything needs to get done first. But she literally just sits there and refuses to move. She's too tired. In her diary, she writes, "Today, probably we will build a storage." Now, the idea was that they weren't going to take all of their things with them. They were going to build a storage shelter to keep some of this stuff and then pick it back up on the way. They should have already done it by this point, but probably because of how hard going it's been, they just didn't get round to it. Now, on January 31st, they start out at 10 a.m. and they're continuing to follow the Mansi Trail. It's minus 18 degrees Celsius in the morning, and they're only going at roughly 1 mile per hour. Now, this is where things get really interesting. So, some people assume that Igor Dyatlov has made a mistake, but they did have a compass and they know the area really well. So this is why I think that the plans changed rather than a mistake, because now they're heading towards the Kholat Syakhl instead of their original planned route. So I'm just going to have a look here for you, because there are some details in the diary. So what they've put on here is, weather today is a bit worse. The wind is from the west and it's snowing. Yesterday, it seems we stumbled upon the resting stop of a Mansi hunter. The deer don't go any further, and the hunter took the beaten trail by himself. We are following in his steps. Trying out new ways to clear the path, the first in line drops his backpack, skis forward for 5 minutes, and then comes back for a 10 to 15-minute break, then catches up with the group. So we can tell from here that things are getting more difficult. They do say firewood is scarce, mostly damp furs. We build the campfire on the logs because we're too tired to dig a fire pit. Dinner's in the tent. It's nice and warm. Can't imagine such a comfort on the ridge with howling wind outside, hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements. Now that was written by Igor Dyatlov himself in the group diary. So on February the 1st, the group start out late. They don't actually say how late. Now, the reason for this could be that there are things that would affect them getting their grade 3, which are things like saying that they've changed their path and things like not starting out late or not building the storage in the right area. So that could be why some details in their diary are a bit sketchy, because it can really affect that whether or not they get their grades. They end up actually only covering a really small amount. They only cover 2 kilometers, which is nowhere near what they should be covering at this point. And they pitched a tent on the open ridge, which they should know better than to do. And not only this, but they actually pitched the tent so that the opening is facing into the wind, which is also quite strange because, again, with them being very experienced hikers, that's something you'd expect them not to do. The Dyatlov group had to prepare a note for the ascent to Mount Autorten, but instead they end up writing the evening Autorten, which is a funny propaganda leaflet, essentially. It's their jokey version of a newspaper. Now, there is a lot of misconception with this and a lot of false information out there. You'll probably, if you look into it for 5 minutes on the internet, you'll hear claims that they wrote in there, "We know now the snowmen are real. They exist in the northern Ural Mountains," or things like that. A lot has been made out of this supposed comment, "Now we know snowmen exist," in a documentary that's actually on the Discovery Channel or Discovery Plus at the moment, Russian Yeti. They try and tie it in with a supposed secret Russian project called Project Snowman. In reality, as you can see here, what they've written is, in recent years there has been a heated debate about the existence of Yeti. According to recent reports, Yeti lives in the northern Ural near Mount Autorten. Now, this is a funny, it's just something they've done to pass the time. As you can see, the other things they've written about here is that can 9 hikers get by with 1 stove and a blanket, and a team of radio technicians, including comrades Doroshenko and Kolmogrova, set a new world record for portable stove assembly, 1 hour and 2 minutes. Now, this is what leads people to be skeptical. So they think that this is seen as them having a laugh because they're cold, they're tired, and they know they're in for a rough night. So they're just trying to cheer themselves up. But the comment about the Yeti is combined with facts. So yes, they are 9 hikers with just a stove and a blanket. Yes, they apparently did set up the stove in record time. So there's a lot of debate over this. So I suppose it comes down to, are you willing to agree whether or not Yeti exist? If you are open to that, then could this possibly be a Yeti attack? If not, then, you know, they're just having a laugh. But we don't know. That's the thing. We don't know exactly what was going on. Now, at some point during the late night or early morning, they cut their way out of the tent. They don't try and go through the flap at the front. They don't it's just buttoned up, so it would take them literally 2 minutes less maybe to get through it. But instead they make slashes in the tent to get out. Now if you have a look here, you can see that there are some smaller slashes towards the top, which some people take to be peepholes, other people take to have been cut to allow smoke out, and then they slash the tent to actually get out. They then walk in an orderly fashion, not panicking, not running. They literally walk in file 1.5 kilometers away to a small section of woods where they try and build a fire. Now, at this point, they're in tent clothes, which essentially is a pair of long trousers, a long t-shirt, and 1 to 2 pairs of socks. We know that Igor Dyatlov has grabbed his coat, and we know that Ludmila has grabbed her hat, and both Semyon and Nikolai have their boots on. Now, the reason most people think for them to having boots on when nobody else has got their shoes on is maybe they'd gone outside to urinate. But again, we don't know for certain. So the next thing we know about this group is February 20th, a search party is assembled by the Ural Polytechnic Institute. The Mansi tribe actually join in, and they bring their dogs along, their hunting dogs, to try and help find the group. So they find the tent. It takes them a while because they're searching Mount O'Torton and the group never got that far. They're nowhere near where they should be. So when they eventually come round to the Kholat Syakal, it's actually spotted by a helicopter, their tent is, and they go from there searching. So this is about a week after the 20th. So we're around about February 27th here. The first body's found. Now, before I start this, I just want to warn you, there are going to be some graphic images here because what's happened isn't lovely, I'm not going to lie. Yuri's Krivonyshenko and Doroshenko were found by a tree. They were found by the remains of a fire. So we know they both died of hypothermia. When they were found, they were nearly naked, which led a lot of people to believe that they had been victims of paradoxical undressing, which is where you get so cold that your body starts to think it's warm, so you strip off to cool down, and then you die of hypothermia. What actually happened, as far as they can, from what they found later, is that these two must have died first, and the other members of the group actually took a lot of their clothing to try and survive themselves. Now, these two had actually been climbing up the tree to break off branches, which explains why there were abrasions on their hands and skin was found on the tree. It's where they were up there trying to snap off branches to keep their fire going. Sadly, it didn't work for them. The next bodies found were the bodies of Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogrova, and Rustin Slobodin. Now, they were found heading back towards the tent. So they were around 300 kilometers away from each other, and it appears that they were trying to make their way back to the tent when they died. Now, a lot was made out of the fact that Igor Dyatlov was found with his hands in front of his face, as if trying to ward off an attack. But what they did find then, on examining the area properly, was that he died face down. So what they think probably happened was, if Zenaida died after him, she could have turned him over to try and take his coat to enhance her chances of survival. But she couldn't manage it because he was frozen solid. Now, it took them a couple of months to find the other bodies, and this is where things get really, really weird. So a couple of months later, they find the bodies of Nikolai, Ludmila, and Zolotaryov and Klevetov. and they are in a ravine. Now, everyone else up to this point has just died of hypothermia, nothing else. However, Nikolai has extreme skull damage. Ludmila has a fractured chest, missing eyes, and a missing tongue. Alexander Zolotaryov also has extreme chest fractures and missing eyes. And Kolevatov has just died of hypothermia, but his jacket is open, so it's like he did it willfully. Now, the interesting thing here, and what a lot of people go back to, is that there were no soft tissue damage. So they had chest fractures, skull fractures, and broken ribs, and there's no soft tissue damage. Now, I've had a little look into this, and apparently when it's this cold, it's highly likely, if these were the injuries that killed them, it's highly likely that they died before soft tissue damage could occur. Another thing that people have made a lot out of is that a lot of the bodies were strangely coloured, so they had like an orange tan. Now, that led a lot of people to believe that it could have been infrasound or some form of radiation. However, that kind of orange tan can occur in extremely cold, windy conditions if you don't have goggles or a protective mask on, which we know from the photographs they didn't. With Ludmila missing her tongue, she was actually missing her tongue and part of her lips, and blood was found, uncoagulated blood was found in her stomach, meaning that she was still alive when this happened. Now, there is no reasonable theory. So there aren't any other footprints around, so there's no reason to suspect foul play. Another theory that's quite commonly put forward is that it was an avalanche, but they've said that the slope that they camped on, there wouldn't be an avalanche there. So that kind of rules that out. So we still don't know why 9 experienced hikers would go out in the middle of the night in below freezing temperatures without being dressed first and then would just die. Now, a theory that has been put forward that ticks a lot of the bases, but not quite all, is that they had the stove going, and then either Nikolai, Semyon, or both went out to urinate, and when they came back in, a gust of wind came in with them and reignited some of the embers, which caused the tent to fill up with smoke because the chimney part had been removed by this point. They couldn't get past the stove to get out, which this is where it loses me a little, because if Nikolai and Semyon had literally just come through the tent flap, they would have been right by the front. But apparently they couldn't get, so the theory is they couldn't get past the stove to get out. So they made these small slits in the top of the tent to try and get the smoke out. That didn't work, so they cut the big slits then to get out. The theory then put forward is that due to the heat and the large amount of carbon monoxide inside the tent, they weren't able to get their clothes. So they set a heading and they keep walking, which takes them to the trees, and they feel they'll be able to see when it's safe to go back to the tent, and then they slowly die, essentially. With Nikolai, Ludmila, Zolotaryov and Kolevatov, what they think may have happened there is Nikolai tried to climb the tree to see if it was safe to go back to the tent, to see if there was any smoke, fell out of the tree, causing the skull fractures and damage to his neck. So Nikolai, Ludmila, Zolotaryov and Kolevatov all go to build a bit of a snow camp type thing to try and keep them warm. As they're going up a slope to get wood for this, because they need to get branches and put them together as like a floor to keep them off the snow, there is an avalanche, a small mini avalanche, which throw Ludmila, Nikolai and Zolotaryov back into the ravine. Now Zolotaryov and Lyudmila go face down, causing the chest fractures and broken ribs, and causing Lyudmila to bite through her tongue and part of her lip. And essentially they die quite quickly because of the extent of these injuries. And then very finally, Klevetov, seeing what's happened to his friends, basically just opens up his jacket and lets himself die. And then the missing eyes is due to scavengers. So that does kind of tick all of the boxes, but it sounds a bit Final Destination-ish for me. It requires quite a series of events, which if one thing didn't happen, then this wouldn't have happened. Now, the thing I think that has kept this mystery alive is the Russian government closed everything down. The first person to be investigating was a guy called Lev Ivanov. Now, he got taken off the case as soon as he said that it could be aliens. Now, the reason he said that is orange lights were reported in the sky around the time that this happened, so around February 1st, February 2nd. According to the Russian military and Russian government, there were no tests going on at that point, so it couldn't have been a missile or aircraft or anything like that. So Lev Ivanov said that, it might have been an alien attack, and he then got taken off the case. Theories have been put forward that maybe the Russian government were testing some kind of air bomb, which is what caused them to leave the tent in such a panic. It's been put forward a theory that it was the Mansi tribe, but like I said, there were no other footprints in the area, so we don't have anything to say that, yes, that there was any third party involved. The other interesting thing is 2 of the members of the party were found to have high levels of radiation on their clothing. Now, my first question is, why were they testing them for radiation? I mean, they're hiking. Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't expect them to come into contact with radiation. And then question number 2 is why? Why would they have radiation? Because again, they're in the middle of nowhere. There's no reason for it. So that's another question. And it seems like every time you get a little bit further into this, you don't get real answers, you just get more questions. Now, as far as the government classifying the files, you have to remember this was Soviet Russia in 1959, the Cold War, things like that. So yes, everything was classified at the time. That isn't very surprising. What baffles me a little is after experts at the time categorically stating that this particular ridge would not have had an avalanche, last year the Russian government reopened the case and had it looked back into, and they came back with, yes, it was an avalanche. That's the one thing that really doesn't sit well with me. After all this time, I don't think it's something we'll ever know for certain, but it's definitely an interesting case, and there are 72 different theories out there as to what could have happened. And they do range from everything from the Soviet government, CIA agents, Mansi, aliens, the Yeti. I think everyone will have their own interpretation and put on it what they think. But it's a tragic and intriguing tale, and it happened, and it happened. It's just odd. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If I've piqued your interest at all, take a look. Follow the link in the description, which will take you through to my review of the movie, The Dyatlov Pass Incident, which is a horror movie sort of taking off from this idea. Until next time, enjoy yourselves, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.